Hi, everybody. Welcome. All right. So, for today, we're talking about how to sing better in 2023. It's sort of like a New Year's resolution live stream lesson. So, we'll talk about sort of strategies and sort of my 2 cents on this whole concept of New Year's resolutions. And, at the beginning of the year, everyone's immediately starting to think about like, okay, what am I going to plan for this year? It flies by, and am I going to accomplish anything? And so I get and I totally understand the concept of New Year's resolutions, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a challenge. Sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves. Hi, welcome. And so, the classic thing, right? We set all these resolutions and then we end up not doing them because it's such a big pressure. And we play this game of procrastination. And the bigger the resolution, the more intangible it starts to seem. So, I'm going to talk about sort of my strategy when I get to the beginning of the year and what I think really helps with singing better in general. Again, sometimes, it's a very vague term like, I'm going to sing better. And it's like, what does that mean? It's different things for different people. And the voice is always about balance. So I'm going to break down kind of like the whole vocal practice in this lesson, which I think will be really helpful for some people. And you can kind of pick and choose, right? The idea is to customize it to what your needs are. So again, we have this mad rush, right? Finish to the end of the year, a little bit of time off, and then all of a sudden it's like, all right, what are your resolutions? And everyone asks that question. Um, and kind of my answer is slow down and just take stock of things. Using your practice, your vocal practice, if you have one, and we'll talk about if you don't, um, is a great way to be present with your voice. And when we slow down, our voice and our body tells us what we need a little more. And that's going to be the way to sort of dial your compass appropriately for the year. Again, it's small incremental changes that make the big difference. But ultimately, we can do all sorts of practices that aren't necessarily serving us. And we have to check in with our practice and see if we need to change things, modify what we're doing. And that's going to set us on a course for the whole year. At least that's the way I think about it. And every student's a little different. So I'm going to kind of talk about this sort of framework, right? Always, I don't like to say like this is exactly what you need to improve your voice because it's different for every person. And this is what I do a lot with my students is we figure out what do you need to do to bring your voice into balance. Um, so in general, I talk about the voice and the practice of the voice as having four kind of main branches to it. Um, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And we're going to talk about this absolutely, Joe. In terms of switching registers and being comfortable with one or the other. Sometimes we practice all in one register, and might want to realize that it's actually really beneficial to switch your strategy if you've been doing a lot in just one routine. So we'll get back to that in a second. So there are four main branches, and I really want to talk about this because I think we focus a lot. Obviously, I'm a voice teacher. We focus a lot on vocal technique, which is just one branch of the practice to me. And if you only focus on your vocal technique, sometimes you run into some serious issues as well, actually, with your inspiration and even understanding what to do and where to take your voice. So we're going to talk about vocal technique is really, really important. And there's definitely some strategies I'm going to discuss. Ultimately, like if you're new to all of this, one of the first questions I ask people is, do you have a consistent practice? And a lot of times it's like, actually, not really, right? We like to think we do, and again, sometimes we think about planning too much. A consistent practice can be a small thing that you do just regularly, and you have to integrate it into your life a little more. So if you bust out of the gates in January and you're like, okay, I'm going to practice 1 hour every day or 2 hours, sometimes that's just going to backfire and ultimately may not actually serve you, and it might slow you down in the long run. So really the trick to speed and efficiency in your practice and getting better faster is really just about fine tuning exactly what your voice needs. So technique, we're going to go over that in a sec. The other thing is ear training and theory skills. I know it's kind of like, some people really don't want to hear about theory, but it's really worthwhile. And ultimately, there's some really cool things that we can do once we understand theory better. Ear training is essential. This might be you, right? You might be doing a lot of technique work, but you need to start switching over to more ear training and theory. The other thing is style and song work. And we're going to discuss some of this too, right? If you're only focusing on your technical practice and even including ear training and theory, but you're not actually finding music that inspires you, that really connects with you, then it's going to kind of all be for naught. Like I've seen so many students, or I've had a number of students where we're doing the technique stuff because it's the tools to enable us ultimately to do what we want. But really, the big changes happen when we find a song that that person really connects to and can start to express themselves through. So it's part of the practice to explore new music, or old music, but to explore music that's new to you and get out there, listen to stuff, go to live performances, um, and really explore. And that's where a lot of this inspiration comes from, right? So we'll get to that too as well, and we'll talk more about it. And then the last sort of branch that's so important is your performance skills, or how do you manifest what you're doing and express it to other people. Um, for some of you, we're gonna talk about sort of the opposite things in each category. For some of you, you might actually spend a lot of time performing, and I just want to recommend that performance is not practice or your technical practice. And so it's really important, actually, if you're a really active performer, to make sure that you're developing a consistent practice that you can fall back on. And now is a great time to do that, because as the year starts to go into full swing, we just feel like we can't think straight and we can't um, develop a practice at that point. So if you start now and little bit by little bit, that's going to save you later on, is kind of the way I think about it. Again, for myself, is, by the time it's the holiday season and you're doing all this work, gig work and performance, it's too late to try and get a consistent practice sometimes. I mean, again, start when you can, of course, but if you can start now, it's ideal. Um, Yeah, Joe, actually, it's interesting when people talk about head voice and falsetto. I really see that as the same thing. It's just a sort of almost a little more of a gendered term. Falsetto tends to be considered more of a male thing, and head voice we sort of said as a female thing, but they're really interchangeable. And then in some cases, falsetto can be considered a stylistic element if you think about like a very light, wispy head voice. So yeah, absolutely. Though, if you want to sing falsetto stuff, you're going to want to condition your head voice more. And oftentimes, when people do falsetto singing, they're doing more of like a mixed kind of voice thing. So definitely, though, especially for a lot of male singers, if you're singing only in your chest voice, it's going to limit you, and you might want to switch around and explore your head voice as like sort of a new sort of thing. Um, okay, so I'm going to go through each of these branches, and I'm going to talk about sort of the two sides to it. So some people, when we're talking about technique, um, some people don't have a consistent practice. So the first thing I ask them, and all really good singers too, but it'll catch up with you, just like I had mentioned earlier. If you don't have a consistent practice, now's your time to start to assemble this. One of the simplest ones that I do is, first, I think about stretching, and I make sure that I actually check in with my body, twist my head and my neck, my back, and pick up a certain, there's all sorts of stretch routines. There's some specific ones for singing. Sometimes taking some time and really doing some self massage. This is how I start out my practice for technical stuff. And then I work on my breath work. So I'll do those hissing kinds of exercises. If anyone who knows my practice, I'm making sure that I stimulate my breath so that naturally I'm taking larger breaths without it sort of becoming this artificial thing, right? If you're not actually waking up your breath, then you're more likely to use it incorrectly or over kind of engage or try to do it in a kind of a too it's like this sort of active and passive part of our body. If we're too consciously kind of like creating a concerted effort with our breath, we don't get into the right kind of flow state. So I take my time and I feel my breath out. A lot of people have certain habits that develop as we are trying to accomplish a lot of our vocal things, and we're getting really busy, and really hectic. And so the breath right now is a great time to really focus on your breath. There's a difference between a guarded breath where we're holding it versus a breath that's supported and more in a flow state, right? Where we're releasing down and out into it. And so you can really simply think about this as, if this area is really hard, you're maybe guarding a little bit. And if this area is too soft, then you're maybe not engaging and finding that sort of flow state as you're dropping down into your belly and your back. So I'll do a breath like thing and I'll test for this, right? I'll be like, this area should be soft. It's muscle isolation and it's actually surprisingly hard. It takes a little bit of time. Slow down. Don't try to overwork this. Just notice what your body's doing. And the key concept, again, for today is taking some time to be present with your voice and with your technique. And that's actually the key to what you need to do this year. And it's going to be different for everybody. It's not just like, let's sing better, right? I mean, obviously, that's the overarching vague concept, but everyone has a different thing that they need to do. We neglect our breath, and it's the power source of our voice. You really can spend some quality time here doing deep breathing and making sure that you're engaging from your lower abdominal muscles and not from these upper abdominal muscles. So this is just a typical practice if you don't have something consistent. We stretch, we breathe, and then I think about my resonator and I do some vocal stretching. So this is a thing that I do in a number of my courses, and it's the circle of vowels. And I'm just trying to feel out where the resonance is going in my head and if I get stuck in a certain postural pattern. So this is a huge thing about being present with your voice. And I use this as kind of almost like echolocation to find out what parts of my body are out of alignment. And ultimately, you just notice it. A lot of the times when we do this, we feel something that's not quite there and we want to change something and work really hard to try and like make it happen. Instead, just take note of it, keep putting your hands in different places and do repetition and allow your body to find that balance. So again, a big part of it is I will actually move my head and my neck and my shoulders around a little bit as I'm doing this to make sure that I'm not too rigid. And it also kind of tells me again where I'm starting to lock up in place because it can be hard to tell. So it's like this. I'll go like, yeah. I'm going E A A O U, and I'm just playing around with it. It doesn't have to be that exact circle. I could be like, why, as we start doing this, we immediately start to kind of take note of what our chords feel like. We start to gain this new awareness because we're starting to sing. So you might find that there's stuff there. If you have a lot of acid reflux or allergies or it's just a colder season, then you might find that there's a lot of stuff kind of hanging out here. Don't try to attack at it. Just keep doing the vibration and it'll actually come out as you're doing this. So again, part of this is repetition, slowing down, and using the exercises to feel what's happening in your body better. That's really the vocal practice. So if you're on a rush to like, I'm going to do a million drills and I'm just going to keep going and I'm going to do all the courses, then you're actually you're going to slow yourself down in a strange way, right? So that's my big point to people is I often will get students who have done all the courses and 30-day thing. And I'm like, we need to just focus on the breath and the support because that fundamental skill hasn't quite connected. It's such a feeling based art form. So don't be in a rush to try and accomplish all these things. Go back to the fundamentals. So that was resonance and thinking about the vowel shapes and these motions to get a sense again about my coordination, the tension in my neck and my jaw and my tongue. And so as I do this, I might go like, then I reset. exploring all these areas. Again, I can feel what vowels are kind of stuck. That might change the way my practice goes. A lot of people get really stuck with their E vowels, they get kind of nasal. They're like, yeah, yeah. So then I'll focus on trying to use the other vowels to kind of straighten that out and get a little bit of a taller E shape. So this is our consistent practice. I'm spending a little extra time here because it is important ultimately. And if you don't do this, then you should have a consistent practice. It's to check in from week to week or day to day and see how your voice is doing. And again, we don't even need to be in a rush to change much. The awareness is key, and the body actually starts to change things as we find out, as we can as we just start to pay more attention and become more aware and feel what's happening. So we call it, building some of that feedback, and that's what makes a really good singer is we're more aware of the sensations that are happening in our body, and then we're more likely to take care of our voice when we need to, or condition it when it feels like it's falling out of shape. So stretch, breathe, do some resonance and alignment work. That's what I call that. And then we can get to conditioning. Now, here we're thinking about our SOVTs, like our consonants, right? It's a fancy term for our closed spaces. And we can use this to help gain connection to our support. And now we're starting to kind of do both things. We're doing support and thinking about when we open to our open vowels, making sure that we continue to engage our support and start to fill out the space with tone. So when a voice isn't really open or working correctly, this space starts to collapse a lot and we get kind of a smaller space. The body's trying to compensate and tension. The goal is mainly just to see if I can use my belly, my back pressure and support to see if I can actually open up this whole space and get more of an authentic sound, which is my whole face, right? That's what I mean by this echolocation kind of a thing. And again, for chest voice and for head voice, and depends on, some people prefer one or the other, depending. And you might want to switch back and forth and take note again, which is weaker, which one feels a little easier to connect to. This has a lot to do with our range and our voice type, but training balance is so so important. So with conditioning, I'll do things like this, where I'm going like ma, ma, ma. I'm feeling the difference between coming onto my support, pressing out my belly and my back, and relaxing and letting the pitch fall back down. So this starts relaxed, it's like passive, ma, and then ma, ma. It's really the M where I'm building up a lot of that pressure. And you'll notice if you're not, these part of your body isn't really active, it'll scoop up or the M won't even really pitch appropriately. It'll be like ma, 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 right? Mm, ma, ma. It's a great chance to feel that. And again, it's just a position. We're not pressing from here. Just because my mouth is closed, it's very gentle. I'm able to build up pressure in my belly, my back better. So that's M. It's just one SOVT. And what I will mention is if you've been doing this technique stuff a lot and you're trying to look for something new, this is sort of something that happens, right? We get into too much of a routine and we get kind of rigid. Then consider mixing this up a little bit, switching your SOVT strategy. Maybe you use a Z or a lip trill or an N or an NG. I'll show you what I mean. So this was the M one going like ma, ma, ma. The N one is our tongue going to our hard palate. Na, na, na. I'm sealing the vocal tract by closing with the tongue here. Now, a lot of people are going to want to go na, na, na. It's a little excess, and it ultimately is going to potentially lock up the voice if you sing in the higher part of your range or really quickly. So try to see if you can get it just to be muscle isolation, just the tongue. Na, na, na. And now I did it from low to high. You can switch the direction, right? Be like, na, na. A lot of people find that actually to be a little easier to go from a higher note down. It's still lower in the range, or I'm kind of a little bit in the middle right now. But going from top down follows our natural breath a little more. So that could be a nice switch. It seems a little counterintuitive, but it actually helps. So it's that feeling of like, na, na, active, and then passive, relaxed. So that's an N. I could do an NG. It could be like a lot of people find that to be very weird feeling, but I'm just closing with the heel of my tongue to my soft palate. That can be a really great one if you haven't used it because it's right over the vocal tract or a big portion of the vocal tract. It helps keep everything in alignment. And it's also we're just strengthening our muscles here and our pharynx and our tongue and just being able to isolate in the right direction. So be slow about it and make sure with this one as well that your jaw stays open, that you're not it's so I'm conditioning my voice. I'm doing like tongue push-ups and feeling out my support. And eventually I would take that higher and higher in my range just to see can I keep everything coordinated appropriately and not doing anything sort of extra, straining my head and my neck coming out, locking in place too much. You notice I always kind of go from one note to the other when I'm thinking about conditioning because it's almost kind of like a push-up, right? We have to engage and then relax, and that really helps us work out in a healthier way. So again, you want to just take this as far as you can that's comfortable, and when you start to kind of do extra stuff, it's a sign that you're getting to that strength level where you're getting a little bit of some extra compensating things or muscle failure. Like think about like when you're like if you're like a bodybuilder or in a sport, and at a certain point when your body's really tired, we start to get kind of sloppy with things and we start using all this extra stuff, and it might not condition our voice appropriately. So again, slow down, be present, and pay attention to what's happening, coming on and off of our support. That's really the key. So in this way, I'm checking in with my vocal technique and I'm thinking about these different categories. Head voice as well. You can do the same kind of thing. I like to switch up the interval. Of course, I was just doing a sort of a fifth down here. That could also be a way that you switch up your practice. Is if you're always using a certain kind of interval, switch up the feeling. In head voice, let's do like a fourth. I'm going like it's the same thing. I'm coming on and off of my support, and I'm trying to feel, can I gain connection to that belly and my back? As I'm in the higher note, it engages, and then as I relax to the lower note, my body actually comes in. So it's so again, it's all about sort of surveying what's happening. If that already feels really hard, there's all sorts of exercises to help find your head voice and get the right kind of chord compression and work the tone and everything. That's for its own individual category. But again, my point is you want to check in with all these aspects of your voice. Do I have good resonance and alignment? Be patient with that and allow your body to sort of calibrate and find that, right? That was like doing the vowel thing. Can I get on and off of my support and change my pitch without my body locking up or pressure happening in other places? That's like support conditioning. So again, stretch your body, work on your breath, do resonance and alignment, and then stretching your vocal mechanism internally, and then do some support stuff. So that's if you're doing if you don't have a consistent practice doing each one of these categories, and you can mix and match exactly what you're doing. And, I like to have lots of different options, but you want to make sure you check in with each part of your voice, and that's going to really tell you, okay, like this part of my voice, I need to really like just focus more on that and help bring everything else into balance. So let's go back to this concept of if you already have a practice uh, and you're trying to find sort of a new way to connect, if we're doing the same thing over and over again, consistency can kind of backfire. It's important, and I really, really think it's essential for building and growing your voice and singing better in general. Uh, but if you're the kind of person, it's always about balance. If you're the kind of person who's doing the same sort of rigid thing, our body starts to kind of get used to it and tune out a little bit. And so we always want to keep that awareness going. So switch up your style. Like sometimes I focus on, drone notes, right? Like that's like doing the resonance thing. But if you're doing a lot of specific pitches, even just doing stuff where it's like, like way, like step by step. Um, you might, or even ma ma ma, thinking about individual pitches. You might consider trying to find the slidey, kind of more flowy part of your voice using sirens. It's a great way to warm up the voice. So I'll start with breath, and I'll go like coming on and off the support, and then I might take an SOVT and go like and I'm slowly rounding up and down. You can use a tool. If you haven't tried this, you can use like a metal straw. You can buy the actual singer straws. They're a little expensive, and they'll give you kind of different diameters to work with to kind of weight train. But you can sing through a straw. It's not uh, breathing into the straw. That's the wrong concept. It's always your exhalation and that part of our singing. But you can do a slidey thing with the straw like this. And again, the main point is actually to get this part to activate. If you haven't tried that kind of a thing, it could be just a nice way to mix things up, get a different sensation going, and it definitely works to help you condition your voice and get a better sense of support. Um, and then you can practice going between your registers, doing like, hi, how's it going? You can do like, and I'm feeling more of this sort of flowy, slidey part of my voice. If you're someone who sings specific notes all the time, that may be a great way to break out of that sort of habit of kind of locking around notes that can happen sometimes when we think too pointillistic, like note by note. The voice functions best with flow. Now, if you're the other side and you're someone who's very scoopy and slidey, then you actually may go back and try the droning thing or something where you're focusing on specific tones, making sure that you're keeping an even amount of pressure, slowing down, doing scales. Um, so again, the whole point is you need to use the practice to determine what is happening with your voice and make sense of, am I getting too stuck in a pattern? Um, or do I not have a system so that I can't even judge how my voice is changing from week to week? So this is really what I'm teaching with the practice a lot of the time is it's almost like mind body inductive reasoning. So like we're creating like a scientific method of I'm checking in with my voice regularly and slowly altering patterns, but doing it methodically based on what I'm noticing and seeing if it has an effect on my voice. So this is, it's the new year, so it's a great time to take stock of things. Yeah, absolutely. And again, take your time with things. Uh, we're figuring out what part of the voice we need to work on. The pitch thing, sometimes that can be hard to tell if you're singing in tune. Let's go to this next concept of ear training and theory stuff. Also, something that I get all the time with people who feel like, oh, I can't sing, or back in the day, people told me that I should never sing. It's usually because they don't quite have a sense of how to properly intonate, and some of it's actually a physical skill. So that the technique thing will help with this. But if you really want to start to hone in on like, am I singing in tune? You need extra resources. You're gonna need a teacher like me, or there's so many teachers out there who can help you. Um, and you know, uh, God's daughter, that's your username. This is a big thing, and we're going to talk about this, our perception of our voice. And ultimately, I like to think of it more like a feeling-based art form. And singing is a wellness activity first and foremost. So connecting with your voice helps you feel what's going on in your body. And it ultimately can be a very rewarding feeling. It releases all these endorphins, but it's one of those things where people are afraid to start because of judgment. And so I always say, treat it as a wellness activity first. We're stretching and gaining connection to our voice, gaining strength in the voice. And then from there, it can start to turn into something that you can show other people. But it's just like when people say for yoga, like, oh, I'm not very flexible, so I don't want to stretch, right? Or I don't like my voice, so I hide my singing. You know, ultimately it's sort of a thing that we can get stuck on, right? And the only way to get to actually find that beautiful part of our voice is to condition and to stretch it. And I ultimately believe that technique is freeing. It should make you sound more like yourself. We'll talk about style and some of those things where it gets a little interesting, but it should make, your main central technique of just sort of down the middle with your voice. Um, it's I really ultimately believe that it's every voice is beautiful. It's just a matter of finding the right appropriate balance and a free voice, and that allows you to express yourself better. And just think about again, um, sort of the artistry side of things is how do you use your voice and for what purpose? And we're going to talk about that too as well once we get to sort of the third branch of singing. And sometimes that's really the key to finding your voice. You're doing your technique stuff, think about the ear training. Let's keep up with that ear training thing for a second. So we need external sources to help us. It's really hard to hear yourself, and if you're listening to yourself too much internally, you're not quite getting the right sound. So recording yourself for sure, using a teacher, there's some of these websites or tools, resources like Singing Carrots or anything where it actually shows you your voice in real time compared to like a keyboard or a musical staff. There's this one called Ella for iPhones. It's like that, and it shows you your voice on the clef. So written music and shows you where your voice is sitting. So you actually can start to learn to read that way. Really, like with written music, the dots are just showing you where your pitch should go and you can follow the contour. And then eventually we can start to learn to be really, really specific with that. We have some great courses on ear training and thinking about scales and using numbers, which I think is a little more accessible than solfege, which is like the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's a really great skill, but it's a little more advanced because it actually gets very particular. Now, if you're someone who wants to get more advanced, reach out to me. I can help you with that. Or some of these resources. There's great ways to think about doing notes outside of the scale, right? Thinking about all the half steps in between the scale. And I've got some really great things for that. And hopefully it'll be one of the courses this year that we'll go over is how do we really refine our ear training. Maybe you do all of your patterns in major. Um, Yes, absolutely. This is sort of what I do generally most of the time is I have students that I help find their voice, build their voice from scratch if it's something you haven't done before, or just get you out of a pickle because sometimes we get stuck in certain patterns. Um, so yes, absolutely. If you're looking for some help in how to sort of navigate this system, then reach out to me or reach out to Camille or any of the other or any other teacher that's in your immediate area, whatever works for you. But yes, absolutely, that's sort of the whole point here, and it's a little different from like showing off and like yeah, that's part of performance, and we'll talk about that. I'm really more interested in how I can help people bring their voice into balance. If you can talk, you can sing. There's some certain medical things that make it really hard to sing. That's a whole other category. Um, and then we talk about sort of what it means to have an ugly sound, right? Or a pretty sound. And I think there's a lot that can be said about this because it depends on the context. So sometimes it's about not fitting the context of what you're singing. We're going to get to this with style and song choice because I think that's going to really help you. And a lot of times when people are talking about ugly, they're thinking about singing out of tune, which is this pitch thing, or it's the tone or timbre of your voice gets kind of stuck. And that is a little more on the technique side of things, is learning how to isolate your muscles so that you're just using your tongue when it's necessary and not using your jaw so much, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little complex. And it's unique to each person. So again, this is why it's so confusing to figure out what do I do to get my voice better, right? And this is like Sing Better 2023, because different information is going to be helpful for different people in different contexts. And that's again sort of why you look online and it's kind of a nightmare with information and misinformation on how to sing. Some people do it from their own personal perception or experience and how they found their voice, and that may not be the best information for you in particular. Um, yeah, the vibrato thing. That's great that that it's coming and going though, right? So some of it is actually just the patience, and sort of take again being more aware of when it's happening. Sometimes we actually can't even tell when we're doing vibrato more, but I always say vibrato is a product of healthy singing. So it will come as you learn to support appropriately and relax some of these sort of things that are happening in our jaw and our tongue. I love that you finished that course. That's kind of one of the more recent things. And I would ultimately say that vibrato is easier to find when we think of a more back placement, so more open in the back of our throat. And so thinking about song styles or choices that emulate that's going to be helpful. So I think in that actual course, we did some of those kind of like oldie, kind of like Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra stuff to help with that feeling, which can be very good. Classical music, again, you may be thinking, "Oh, I don't want to try classical," but if you are working on one style only all the time, that's also something that might bring you out of balance. Each style, there's certain kinds of technique habits that can develop as we are, if we're like a big belter or we're singing very off the voice and kind of light and floaty, like let's say in a jazz sort of sound sometimes. Uh, you might start to actually find an opposite style to practice. So I don't know what style that you practice, but that's also a great way of exploring things. So, oh, and before I before I rush off into style and song choice, which is really an exciting topic, I think kind of one of the most important things if you're someone who's been doing this practice for a while is how to reconnect with your inspiration. Um, yeah, well, I really love that. This is we're getting all of this really positive feedback, and again, I always really like to see what's helping people and what's not helping, rather than thinking about like I have the cutting edge best strategy for this, and then getting stuck in that system. So I like this to be a dialogue, and that avoids some of these things about like, oh, that teacher ruined my voice or et cetera, et cetera. It's your voice ultimately, and it's about paying attention to what feels good and what works in terms of your goals. And it's good to have a dialogue about, oh, this isn't really working for my voice right now, or this thing, I've been trying this method and it's been giving me tension. And again, the whole point of the method is to gain awareness as to what you're doing with your body. So slow down, turn inward, and try to parcel out the sensations. That's why we kind of break it down in the way that we do. Um, so ear training in theory, just a few more things. One really great way of increasing your ability to perceive pitches better, and theory, is to pick up another instrument. I know I always said I was going to avoid like big changes and New Year's resolutions, but that's actually a really nice resolution, is to explore something new and to explore music in a slightly different way. All the instruments. It's funny, like a lot of guitar teachers and piano teachers talk about singing your instrument and making it, yeah, very cool. Guitar is a great way to practice with your voice, or piano, because it just gives you something to sing into. But again, people talk about how to make instruments actually more like the voice. Um, but you can go either way. The voice is very flexible. Ultimately, being able to hear the tone of a piano or a guitar is going to help you make sense of pitches in general. And there's all sorts of really cool science on. I did this sort of. I was thinking about this after we did our ear training thing. Is it just processing in our brain, or is it actually, does our ear actually gain better resolution over time? Do the hairs in our cochlea change a little bit? And we there's some stuff about ear safety in science. Is like a lot of times when we damage the fibers in our cochlea in our ear, that kind of hearing loss is more permanent. Actually, it's really hard to recover. And so I might think, is that a fixed system? And there's some really cool little studies on the fibers in our ear and the cochlea actually start to bend to pitches better and perhaps have more receptivity to it. So, and they did this with like musicians and non-musicians as a study, and it just goes to show you that by listening to sounds and breaking them down more using a piano or a guitar, and even of course your voice, the uh, the resolution gets clearer. You actually can perceive it better and then make sense of it better. So it's two sides, right? Sometimes it's like I'm listening and it all sounds like a big wash, and that feels like very disorienting, and I can't parcel out one pitch from the next, it's also about patience and time. It's being present with the sounds and really listening to them, and your body will actually start to adjust over time. It's kind of amazing. Um, yeah, what's your, always shoot away with the questions, and I'll answer them as I go. And I love that you've got some new people to the practice here, and keep sticking around for these live streams because I'll go over different topics, and there's a bunch of them already that Camila and I have done. So if you have a particular topic, and I can sometimes guide you to that material to go over, because again, it's just hard because there's so much information out there. It's hard to know exactly what you should be thinking about to help improve your voice. And I know this is a little more of a talking uh, live stream, but like a lot of the time I'm trying to be very hands-on with this stuff so that we have actual exercises that help us apply what we're thinking about. But think of this as like 2023, the way station. Like, what are some ways to mix it up or gain more consistency depending on what you need? Um, does your voice have to match with the instrument? That's a very interesting question. It depends on if you're accompanying yourself with that instrument, like as you're singing. So sometimes contrast can be cool, but yeah, a lot of times as we sing with a certain instrument, we start to kind of emulate the tone a little more. And that can be helpful for a smooth sound. But this starts to get into some of the artistic questions. And I think this is where we can actually free things up. So let's go on to style and song choice. So the cool thing about style, when you really look at it, people sing in so many different ways. And in certain contexts, it's incredibly beautiful. And in others, it could be very, very sort of stark, right? Like the too much of a contrast where it feels disjointed or um, not quite blending in the way that we want. So it's really dependent to different styles. And if you're like, well, I don't know what style I like, this is the thing. It's like spend some time and listen to some music. Like I'm guilty of this. Like sometimes I'm spend so much time working on music that I don't really slow down to appreciate it. I actually just got myself a record player over there. And that's been really nice to feel the sound more physically because I really respond to that instead of more conceptual sounds from our MP3s. So if you're into that and you're an audiophile, like that can be a really cool way of feeling things more. Um, has to match. So yes, what you're talking about is pitch matching. God's daughter. I love that name. That's fun. What you're talking about is pitch matching. So you want to work more on what we call intonation and pitch matching. And sometimes I find matching with a guitar can be a hard way in because the timbre is a little different and it's a little lighter. Or if you're electric, it's a little too heavy and cacophonous. Um, try with matching with other voices. So finding a teacher is a really great way of doing this. A lot of times when I'm helping people with pitch matching, we're talking about the sensations. Like I'll work on the perception of singing, right, where we feel different vibrations in our chest voice and our head voice, which is a little more of a metaphor. I'll talk about that another time. But we essentially, I am guiding them with my voice a lot of the time. So let's say they're singing too low, and I'll find that pitch that they're at. Like let's say we're trying to sing that pitch, but they're all there. I'll be like Sometimes it has to do with our technique and our ability to control our support. So I know this is all kind of new to you, but a lot of times pitch matching actually is more of a technical issue that our body just can't actually appropriately build up pressure or relax the pressure to get to the right pitch. So again, what I would recommend is find a teacher. The piano is probably the next easiest thing to match with. It's like other voices because the timbre is similar. Um, Sometimes people like to find a male or female teacher, particularly because they can match with that sound a little better. Um, my too much with the yeah, so this is sort of the idea is experiment and switch it up. Maybe like try matching to a piano. Like try this that website Singing Carrots. It gives you a little keyboard. You go to the tools and you go to the pitch matching sort of thing in the tools, and then you enable your mic. And as you sing, it'll show you where you are on a keyboard. And that can be really helpful. And you can actually press the keyboard note and it'll play the pitch. and then you can practice matching it, see where your voice is landing when you try, and then try to adjust that. So I have a lot of students who use that sort of outside of classes to help them practice this on a day-to-day basis. What's so cool nowadays is we have all these resources. You can use a lot of phone apps and online resources to actually help you get feedback moment to moment. Although a person is sometimes the best because I can really help you understand what you're doing, and and then again over time are we're actually able to perceive the pitches better. So some of it is patience and consistency, like always, and being really present and trying to be aware and focus on what's happening and around you and try to really listen to and feel the sound. That's going to be really helpful. So a lot of the times maybe there's just you're trying to do too much at once, right? Playing guitar and singing can be really hard because you're multitasking. So you might want to slow it down, and you might want to just focus on one instrument at a time or one note and try to match with that. Sometimes it has to do with your registers. And so, again, it might be helpful to have a teacher in this kind of situation. Um, but yeah, it's generally voices are easiest to follow because it's similar, and finding a similar voice to that, is great for voice type. Piano, and then guitar. I would say generally in that order, it's a little harder, is what I've found for people to match a guitar appropriately without kind of listening to the other instruments first, because it just like a guitar string, if you think about when it vibrates, it's sort of like it's a little less consistent actually. There's a fluctuation in it. This sometimes messes with people when they're trying to tune a guitar, right? Like they're hitting it too much, and it's like you're hearing just the higher end of the pitch bump and not the sort of relax into it sort of part of it, because it's all like a physics thing. Um Yeah, and this is the cool thing about picking up other instruments is I think sometimes people are afraid of starting piano because they think, "Oh, well, I have to do one of these like kind of like, like, and it's like feel a little painstaking. You're doing like children's lullabies and stuff. You can actually do a chord-based method. So like playing a Miley Cyrus song, like I would look that song up on a website, find a lead sheet, and then I can help people sort of find that too, right? Your ability to just play a few chords, and there's just the simplified sort of structure of a song and follow along that way can be really helpful as well. So as you see, it's all about having a tool belt and all of these different strategies to help people where they're at, including yourself. Like ultimately, like this sort of developed for me trying to figure out what I needed and learning from other teachers and pooling all this information around and starting a dialogue and then seeing it happen help or not help actual students over time. And so I'm always trying to refine the system and see what's working for people and what isn't. And so that kind of communication is really, really helpful. um, yeah, it's again, this is sort of the main thing with this practice, and what I'm sort of talking about is my general overarching concept here today is like slow down, be present. Sometimes we think about New Year's resolutions and we want to jump out the gate and start making big changes and big moves, and we usually burn out pretty quickly, right? So the smaller sort of tilting your compass, finding what you need, and being present is kind of all you really need to do right now. Is sort of the way that I like to think about it. And when I sort of tell my students around this time in this season, allowing your voice to decompress a little bit is really helpful if you're a very active performer, so you can reconnect in a fresh way. That's really great that you play piano and guitar. That'll be very, very helpful. It sounds like if that's the case, that it might be more of a technique thing. And I would actually focus more on support conditioning, actually. So again, it's always about the information. Like one of the first things I do with every student is, so what's going on? What have you been working on? What have you been noticing? And then from there, I can get a sense of what that person might need. And it's so interesting. You have visual cues. You just by people describing what the sensations are, that really helps. And of course, the sound itself. Um, so again, so this style and song choice stuff, you ultimately learn style by just listening and emulating people. And yeah, we teach sort of like a constructivist system of like breaking down sort of units of style, the elements of style, and that's really really helpful. But ultimately, integrating style into your whatever you're doing into any song is about the listening and about your just consistency of trying different songs in that style and paying attention to what they're doing. And then of course I like to help break it down into exercises to help people with the technique stuff. But I spend this time early in the year before things start to really get crazy, although it's already kind of happening, which is like, oh my gosh. But I really spend this time trying to reconnect with what inspires me. And if I don't know, I go out searching. I go on a voyage. I've been trying to find records and like I like the mystery of not knowing what's in there and just listening to it and um, going, try out your streaming platforms and put on some stuff and then when you find something that you're interested in, write it down, put it in a list somewhere and explore that more. Um, uh, yeah, again, I think the piano thing might be helpful for you as well. So I love that. I love that you're doing that. Um, I also think that working as a vocalist with these accompaniment based instruments is really helpful. I'm not saying like don't sing and play violin or something like that, but a piano and a guitar, ukulele, they really help as a complement to the voice being more of a soloistic. Obviously, we sing most of the time one note at a time, well, unless you're doing like overtones and throat singing and stuff, which could be a fun topic at some point, extended technique things. Um, but ultimately, again, like I've just been trying to find songs that get me inspired, and your voice starts to grow from that too. So you can't just do only technique things. You have to sort of think about what's out there, and ultimately, then you start to realize that and this is particular to you as well, God's daughter, because like um, this concept of ugly, you realize that maybe you just haven't found the right style and you're maybe trying to force yourself into a style that doesn't quite fit yet. And again, I don't mean that like don't do that style, but this point of exploring and finding sort of what fits with your technique and your timbre. Again, a teacher can help you do this, finding music can help you do this, but ultimately you have to really be present and explore that. Um, and you don't know, maybe you have the style that you are using isn't something that is there yet, so like listen to all these famous artists who do something new with their voice. Of course pay attention to how things feel, and using a teacher is going to help you if you want to experiment with certain things. But like there's plenty of singers, and I'm not going to like name names, that don't necessarily have like the best technique or whatever, and technique is again about finding a free voice and flexibility and and general sense, technique is what works. So there's lots of different techniques out there. My particular technique is about finding balance and effortlessness. Uh, and then being able to actually break the rules because you have that health in your voice and the stability so that you can actually start to do more stuff with it. Um, but yeah, ultimately, and I love this. I love that you're saying this about, because I was just talking about this with another student. Like, I don't think being a musician is necessarily about how good or bad your technique is. And this is why this style and song choice thing is so important. Being a musician to me is about how you grow and experience reality and through sound. Uh, and that's kind of the idea, is like, what does it make you feel? Do you emotionally connect to things? Do you feel like all of a sudden you have a location, like like it makes sense, like you feel like you belong somewhere. These are just words I'm throwing out about what I think it means to be a musician, and the technique and that stuff will follow. And like my goal is to try and help enable people so that they can express that and feel good about it. Again, it's a wellness activity, but being a musician is being an artist, right? And it's about how you explore sound, right? Compared to being like a visual artist, exploring colors and texture and stuff. And there's a lot of crossover, of course. But, if you find that music is something that's so deep and integral to your life and important moments in your life, then you are a musician. You have the seeds of that. And honestly, you can do all the technique stuff. And if you forget that, then it's kind of for naught. Like there's plenty of like really great singers that lose that over time, right? And so that's why I'm saying it's so important. Take some time, reconnect with the music that really moves you, and and start to ask why. And then I always like the flip side of thinking about things. Also, songs that don't move you or that give you a weird reaction is important to kind of take note of. Like, why? What am I reacting to? Um, and what do I think sounds ugly versus what sounds pretty? Because again, it really can depend, actually. Um, and from artist to artist, there's conflict in that sort of thought, right? So that's this whole concept of style. It's like, so you've got technique and you've got some strength and flexibility in your voice, and you're able to start playing with different parts of your registers and speed up your voice and slow it down and all these kinds of things. That's more technique side of stuff. But you know, what are you what are you using it for, right? Like I think of like technique as kind of like sculpting clay. It's like we're getting everything malleable, and then the style is where, and song choice is where we start to connect a little more with our musician soul, right? And that's, again, I don't like to think about musicians being like, only if you are good are you a musician, because that doesn't make any sense. How would you ever start, right? That's not how any artist or musician has ever started, right? They start because of this passion and this curiosity, and that they're discovering themselves as they're discovering music and discovering their voice or their instruments of choice. Um, so that's that. Again, I also would like to say if you're someone who, oh yeah, because we have this fourth category before we run out of time, performance stuff, right? So if you're someone who's doing all this stuff, you might need that moment and know it's sort of like breaking the ice. Again, wait until you're feeling comfortable, use a teacher, use these feedback and resources, but there's ways to start small with performance in like a less high stakes way. Sometimes we will never perform because we're planning too big of a debut, or you have to be a perfect singer before you can actually start performing. And let me tell you, that'll never, it'll kind of never happen, or you'll be too, at that point, you'll miss you'll miss the train, right? So it's like this part of the thrill and the risk of performing is that we sometimes mess up and we make mistakes, but that's how we grow. So I always think about this. It's not about like minus 50 points. You had a terrible first performance. No, it's about growth mentality. It's thinking about this is a learning experience. And so if you set up safer spaces to do that, we used to do feedback sessions, and maybe we'll start that up again soon. Safe spaces where you have a community of people working with their voice, singing in a choir. There's all sorts of levels of that, but more volunteer based if you're a beginner. Um, all of these things really, really help us grow. And sometimes camaraderie of singing with other people can help you break that ice. And just like anything else, performing is kind of like a muscle. We have to learn how to sort of get comfortable in front of people, and it takes time, and sometimes it comes and goes. Like I can tell you that personally, like sometimes I'm way more nervous than others. Sometimes I feel really calm, and it's just a usually has to do with how often you're performing and how you're managing your stress. And so maybe if you're a performer, pick up a new self-care routine. That's a great way to help your voice. It's also a great way to reapproach performance, and sort of talking about that a little bit too. Like, why do we perform? What's the point? Is it just to impress people and get a lot of good job? Wow, you have such a beautiful voice. I can tell you that over time, it starts to lose its value. It's really about when you see other people connecting to what you're doing, and having emotional experiences, um, having a really great night. These kinds of things. That's what I love seeing. Honestly, it's more important. So that's kind of the idea. Is I'm trying to be a servant to the music, and to the meaning and the art in that too. And if you're a songwriter, you can create that yourself. And if I would recommend like try that out too as like a possible option, as a way to kind of change your practice. And if you're not, then try to get inside the poetry and the lyrics and the headspace. Like, does it match with the music? Like, is this person trying to say something? And the more you think about that, the better your expression gets a lot of the time. So the technique just it's just to enable us to get there. Um, yeah, isn't that funny, right? It's like, how did I become this way? At a certain point you turn around and you're like, I just keep, coming back to music, and it comes and goes. Sometimes people take big breaks from it, and that's totally fine. Don't feel guilt in that. Again, there's this feeling like you have to start from a young kid, and if you're not on that track, then why do it at all? And I again try to always remind people that like we maybe have a problem with this. Like only people who are good at stuff should do it. That's not a great way of thinking about things because then how do you break into it, right? Until do you have to rely on someone else saying, "Oh, you're good, so you should do that." Um, no, it's a wellness strategy first and foremost. Explore your voice. We all have one. The moment we're born, we start using it. Um, and yeah, for songwriting, start small, just like anything else. And I love helping people find that again. It's sort of just helping people get through sort of barriers that they're finding rather than like this is the way that you should write a perfect song, right? That's that's not how art works in general. um, but you'll find actually that people tend to fall into certain patterns. It's very natural. So that's what I'll leave you with on that concept. And so with performance, maybe you don't do it very often. Start small, try to find some ways to flex that muscle, maybe recording yourself singing in front of friends and family or strangers, right? Depends on what is better for you. And then the other thing is if you perform all the time, I just remind people that performing isn't technique practice, and I've run into this too, where I will be performing all the time, but I start developing certain kinds of habits from that. Performing, we naturally get tension that we have to work out, and so the technique practice is how you keep performing more. It's kind of the way I think about it. So if you're doing a lot of performance, spend some time and go back to the technique thing and really create a practice that's a little separate from that actually. That can be really, really helpful. But just in of itself, not even necessarily working on a song. So again, it depends on the person. If you're doing all technique and you're not working on songs, that's a problem. You're doing all songs and you're not working on technique, that's also probably a problem. Balance is kind of always the way that I think about this. So anyways, we've we've reached an hour as well. As always, time flies, and there's lots to talk about. And I think again today, not a lot of singing. Usually, I'm all about like practical skills for every concept, but this is about singing better in 2023, and it's really just how do you tilt your compass and how do you sort of identify what path you should be taking and make small little changes, small steps. That's the best way to integrate it into your lifestyle. And eventually you'll turn around and you'll be like, wow, I can't even remember what where I started. So just like you'd mentioned, um, I love this. And I love that you have that passion. And, again, like reach out and sometimes it's best to find a teacher. People think like, oh, I am self-taught and I can like that's like a better thing, and I always just tell people we're learning from everything. So self-taught is a little bit of a weird way of thinking about it. It's like you're probably listening to singers and emulating their sound, and so they came before you, and that's teaching you something, right? When you listen to music, it's part of the practice. That's why I put it in as a branch of the practice is listening to people who've come before you and have recorded their voice doing certain things. It paves a way for us to find that. And then I would say teachers help you speed up the process. That's at least sort of my mission is, I for myself, like I learned from all these people and they helped me break through certain patterns and habits that might have gotten in my way. We're always paying attention to that because they come and go and we have certain tendencies. And it changes a little bit from, as we keep working on different things. So again, this is the whole thing, right? It's about learning from all the resources around you and being present. And a teacher is going to actually speed that process up for you because sometimes we're just not aware of the patterns that we're doing. So that helps to provide a mirror, right? A little bit. If they're a good teacher, they're not just teaching from their own sort of insular world, but they're trying to respond to what's happening. And um, yeah, it was the TV's fault that I got like this. Yeah, sometimes we try to emulate really advanced singers and we don't know the process and the stepping stones. So again, find a teacher if that's going to be your thing to sing better in 2023. After talking for that whole hour, if there's one really important thing is it's find a teacher who's qualified, who listens to you and responds and helps you find a path to your voice and your artistry. And I'll leave it at that. So happy New Year, everybody. And I'll look forward to our topic next week. I haven't even looked at what that is yet, but I planned it a while ago. So we'll get to that. And yeah, very excited for all of the things to come. And hopefully this has been helpful. And I will catch you all next week. All right. Take care. Bye.